For the past 8 years, the London Science Fiction Festival has endeavoured to showcase some of the best sci-fi and fantasy films on offer. Now for the first time, the Sci-Fi London Lab has been offering daily panel discussions with some of the best creative minds in the movie and literature industry. Cult Friction headed down to talk with some of the UK's top sci-fi literary talents. China Mieville is fond of describing his work as weird fiction and belongs to a loose group of writers, sometimes called New Weird.
I think, writers are often the worst people to talk about their own themes. I think, I'm probably the last person to know what it is that, I'm quote, really writing about, unquote, but I'm interested in cities, and I write a lot about urban stuff, and I tend to like sort of grotesquerie and the kind of that tradition of science fiction which focuses on kind of weirdness and strangeness and sort of and more kind of social science fiction, as opposed to what people sometimes call hard science fiction. So it tends to be more about kind of social and political issues than kind of high-tech spaceships and so on.
Bryan Talbot is a comic book writer and artist. He's best known as the creator of The Adventures of Luther Arkwright and its recent sequel, Heart of Empire. He is currently working on Granville, a steampunk adventure.
Yeah, Granville. It's out in October, and yeah, it's a mixture of genres. So it is set in a steampunk world, but it's a detective thriller basically, steampunk detective thriller, and it also has anthropomorphic characters. So it's the first time I've done an animal comic. It's got the main character's Detective Inspector LeBrock of Scotland Yard, and it's set in most of it's set in a steampunk version of La Belle Époque, the fin de siècle Paris. But it's a fin de siècle Paris that has automatons, and steam-powered telephones and all this sort of stuff, steam-powered TVs and things. But I've been describing it as it's a bit like Sherlock Holmes, directed by Quentin Tarantino.
Pat Cadigan is an American-born science fiction author whose work is described as part of the Cyberpunk movement.
It wasn't all that short-lived, and what happened to it was basically kind of absorbed into mainstream science fiction. What was identified as cyberpunk in 1985 is rightfully identified as hard science fiction now. Themes of identity, of perception of what the reality is, of what the perception of what the reality could be, finding out that things are not what they seem at all, finding out that actually everyone is a different universe, and it's like when you walk down the street, you pass by whole different worlds that you don't even know about. There are things happening that you may never know about, and it's that kind of theme that runs through my work. Is that if we want to visit an alien world, we could just go visit our neighbors sometimes,
Paul McAuley is a hard science fiction writer, dealing with themes such as biotechnology, alternate history, and space travel.
I'm always criticised of what's called info dumping, in other words, having paragraphs of basically explanation of how a moonscape evolved, or what it means, and or how something works. But I'm kind of actually interested in that. I was always the kind of guy who liked the chapters on whales in Moby Dick more than the actual chapters on Ahab. I find those interesting. So I'm very interested in using the science, and the great thing at the moment is that one of the things I was inspired by to write novels set on the moons of Saturn and Jupiter and so on, was that we're getting all these fantastic pictures from robots that are sending all this stuff back, and it's completely changing our view of these worlds, and they're much more dynamic and varied than we thought they were. So that's fantastically interesting for me, because it means that there's instead of just having just a plane with craters on it, there's a lot more going on. And so that means the characters and the way that as their society evolves, have got a lot more variety and a lot more colour straight off the bat. So I use all of that. So I do use an awful lot of science, and I try not to violate too many physical laws, or if I do, I try and figure out a justification for it.
Irish author Oisin McGann is a writer and illustrator of books for young adults.
Well, the age groups are very much a marketing thing, and the writers, I think, quite often don't tend to think in terms of age groups, because although we do tend to think in terms, perhaps yourself at a certain age or what you were like at a certain period in your life. So, language does come into it, but not as often as you would think. I do my work for Barrington Stoke is where I encountered the strictest language editing, because they tend to be for reluctant teenage readers. So you can actually have somebody who isn't good at reading but needs subject matter that is going to appeal to a teenager, which is quite. They might have a reading of an 8-year, like the reading level of an 8-year-old. But in terms of writing for younger readers, I mean, some of it you just have to guess, because editors don't always know exactly what level you're hitting at. The golden rule is keep your sentences short and keep the language fairly simple, but still have fun with it. I mean, the story doesn't work. It doesn't matter how well written it is in terms of how easy the language is. If it hasn't got a good story, it's not going to work anyway.
For more information on Sci-Fi London and the authors interviewed, check out cultfriction.wordpress.com.